Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Julia Fell, and I'm the Assistant Curator at the Museum at Bethel Woods. I want to welcome you to our first Bethel Woods at Home. While the COVID-19 situation continues to make it difficult for us to host programming on our historic site, we still want to gather and get creative with our community, even if it can only be virtual for now. With this series, you can expect interactive lectures, performances, and workshops once a month. Stay tuned at the end of this program to learn about more upcoming programs. Before we begin, I want to take a pause and thank you for being here. In times of confusion, frustration, and happiness alike, it is the arts that have the power to connect, heal, and bring a sense of peace. Without further ado, please allow me to introduce our special guests for tonight's program, Alyssa Adams and Jessica Bidwell. And I think we're going to have Alyssa and Jessica with us in just a moment. Hi, Alyssa and Jess.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and read some biographical information before we get started, starting with Alyssa. Alyssa Adams served as one of the jurors for Earth in Focus in 2020, and the photos that we're showing now are of the 2019 season of the Eddie Adams Workshop Organization, Inc., of which she is board member and treasurer. She and her late husband, photographer Eddie Adams, co-created the event in 1988. Alyssa formerly was operations director of the Bathhouse Photo Rental Studio in New York City and photo editor at TV Guide magazine and Miramax Films. She was also a graphic designer at Carbone Smollett. Some wonderful photos of last year's events at the Eddie Adams Workshop.
Yeah, all in Sullivan County.
All right, and then when we're ready, we're going to have some photos from Jessica Bidwell. Jess was selected by Alyssa as her special juror's pick for this year's Earth in Focus exhibit. And these are the photos that she submitted. Jess is a veteran, having spent the last decade with the Navy. One constant, she says, is her camera. Through her imagery, she looks to capture moments that would forever inform and reach future generations, offering a muse or to simply serve as a glimpse of the world from the sailor's perspective. And again, thank you so much for being here, both of you, Alyssa and Jess.
Thanks, Julia.
I just want to mention that if anyone tonight has questions for Alyssa and Jess, please feel free to type them into the chat. Our program manager, Laura, is going to be watching and collecting those questions, and will share them with us at the end of our program. And before we dive into our questions with Alyssa and Jess, I just want to give a little background information as to why we're here tonight. As many of you know, 2020 is the 50th anniversary of the very first Earth Day. This event was inspired by the early environmental awareness taking place in the 1960s, and was also fueled by the culture of protest that was sparked by the civil rights movement in the Vietnam War. The first Earth Day was organized in 1970, and it drew over 20 million participants acting across the country. This outpour is often cited as the spark of the modern environmental movement. Bethel Woods has commemorated this anniversary by mounting an exhibit in collaboration with Photoville, which highlights our beautiful and extraordinary planet. We hosted a global contest to gather images from photographers around the world to share with our visitors to our site. Our hope is to provide inspiration and interest in preservation and conservation of our dynamic planet. All right, so I think we're just going to dive right into those questions that we had for Alyssa and Jess now. Are you guys ready?
Yep.
Ready to go.
All right, awesome. My first question is for Jess. So Jess, what inspired you to pursue nature photography, and specifically to take the photos that we've just had the pleasure of looking at?
Awesome. Thank you, Julia, first of all, for having me be here. It's a pleasure and an honor. I've always dreamt of being a nature photographer. When I was young, I used to look through Ansel Adams prints, and I would dream of the day that I too would be able to move somebody the way his prints moved me. And also be able to travel freely across like just the nation that we have. It's so beautiful. All of these photos were taken late last year, And I had just separated from the military, and I was anxious to have a camera in my hands again. I would spend hours walking neighborhoods and just shooting all the little details I could find. I chose to focus on the details because for the first time in a long time, I was actually seeing them. I was actually allowing myself the time to go out and enjoy nature the way it's meant to be enjoyed. I kind of have a theory that our minds are so consumed with the day-to-day that we often miss the beauty that lies just before us. And I don't think this consumption is any fault of our own, but rather it's a symptom of our society. And I believe that if more persons were to lust in the beauty which surrounds us, then maybe we would all be more motivated to preserve it.
I couldn't agree more. My next question is for Alyssa. It has to do specifically with Jessica's work. And my question is, why did you choose Jess as your juror's pick, and what speaks to you about her work?
Okay. Well, I want to thank Jessica for her service. Thank you. And I know what it's, to come out of the military. My dad was in for 20 years. I have a lot of friends who I knew when they were coming out of the military, and I know it's a big moment. It's a big change. It's a new start. It means a lot of different things. So congratulations.
Thank you.
On all of those points. And when we were looking at the work for Earth in Focus, Julia, can you remind me, was that in March or I can't remember exactly when it was. I think it was in March, and that's when I think it was right around the time that Cuomo started to shut everything down and everything was a little uncertain. I'm not sure at what point. I don't even know if we knew when we were looking at when we were during the photos, if the show was going to be strictly online or at what point you made that decision. I just remember everything in life being up in the air. And so it was such a relief and so much fun to be a part of the jurying of the photos. So, all having to do with nature and all having to do with Earth Day. And when, there are a lot of great photographs. And when I came across Jess's photographs, I just kind of took a pause and took a beat, because there was something about her images that just, they're very spatial. And I'm not really familiar with, is it macro or micro photography, Jess? How do people refer to it?
That would be macro.
Macro. Okay. So I wasn't, I'm not well versed in it, but I was just, when I'm looking at the pictures, I was just amazed, how did she even go out and see those pictures? And obviously she's very disciplined, because, just the way these photos were framed, they're very graphic, they're very beautiful. I mean, I can read, I'm just going to read really quickly what my initial thoughts were about her photography. I said, "This is a very disciplined photographer with a distinct point of view when capturing images of nature. The images appear simple, but they are complicated in their simplicity. Jessica has a great graphic eye. She uses depth, perception, and color to complement her very deliberate framing that I find both painterly and sculptural. I'm wondering out loud how Jessica finds these images, where she seeks out these miniature universes, and what time of day it is when she heads out with her camera." So those were my initial reactions. And then it's funny because just the experience of looking at all these photos for Earth in Focus was a very calming experience. And then especially to me, Jessica's were as well. And in June, I was participating, I was viewing, B&H had a seminar called Optics, and there was a macro photographer named Carolyn Jensen. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, Jess, or not, but she talked about macro photography being therapeutic. And it really and then I kind of dawned on me why this work kind of attracted me so much in that moment, because, and I'm sure Jess at some point we'll talk about that, but the fact that you can control your world and everything like that. And I'll let her go from here, because I'm sure she has her thoughts on that.
Thank you, Alyssa. I agree. It's very soothing to shoot and to see it. It was a type of therapy that I needed when I entered the real world again from the military, and very disciplined, but also very much my own. I could go any creative style with it. and that's what made it just so fascinating to me.
Well, I think you've sort of both addressed my next question, but if you have anything further to add, I just wanted to ask, like, how has nature in general influenced your photographic practice and the field of photography as you know it in your experience?
Is that for me or for, I think that's for Jeff?
Oh, for either of you.
Oh, okay.
Kind of what I was exploring with this when I put it out there was just to get people to see nature again. I know I didn't see it for a long time. I would overlook the small things and the beautiful things that were right in front of me. And so that was just kind of my intention with putting out sets of this lake. Yeah.
And that's my question. Like, you know, when you're walking along and you're looking at things, I mean, you can see, you know, a person like doing something and you go, oh, that would make a nice picture. But like, how do you see these little teeny tiny things? I mean, do you see them with your eye, or do you take your camera and look for them, or how do you decide what to take a picture of?
You know, it's funny. At first, I think I was looking for them, and now I feel like they call me.
So my next question is also for either of you to answer. We're, talking about Earth Day. It's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day this year, and that was a big influence on the modern environmental movement. So my question is, how has the modern environmental movement affected photography and the way that we look at nature?
Personally, I think that people are becoming more conscious of the harm that we're doing, but I don't think it's embedded in us yet. I kind of have this feeling that if people were to have to live with their trash, they would understand how much they're consuming and how much they're wasting. But we don't see it because we are such a consumer-based society that it's in our habits and it's embedded into us.
Yeah, that's funny, because whenever I walk into a store and I'm looking at everything, I also see it not as things to purchase, but I see it as, what happens to this stuff when nobody wants it anymore. And can you just repeat that question? Oh, how is the modern environmental movement the way we look at nature? Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah, it is. It's okay if you don't have a big answer for it. We can move on to the next question, which I think we sort of started to actually look at, talking about noticing those details, like the trash that you live with versus the bigger picture, where maybe you don't, see things in as much detail. So the question I had, also referring back to Jess's work as a macro photographer, is taking a macro or a micro look at nature, and how can those teeny tiny details and those really sweeping landscapes teach us about Mother Earth?
I think it's important.
Jess, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Okay. I think it's important that we remember that Mother Earth has given us everything we need. We often go to the store to buy food or other sources of fuel, but it all comes from the earth. And if we don't take care of it, where are we going to end up? I think that's a big thing to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Alyssa, did you have any further thoughts on the micro versus the macro, those tiny details versus those big landscapes, and how we can learn about nature and Mother Earth from looking at photography that way?
Oh, yeah. There's a photographer named George Steinmetz who has been around for a while. I think he started photographing in the 80s, and his specialty was he's done a lot of work for Changing Climate with National Geographic. And he would fly in these motorized paragliders and take aerial views. This was way before drone photography was very popular. And he did a story for the New York Times Magazine in 2018 on climate change. and the results of us not taking action. And he covered algae blooming, flooding, Hurricane Harvey in Texas, Bangladesh, wildfires, the melting glaciers in the Swiss Alps. I think the assignment was actually for him to go to every continent and do a series of photographs. So, photography is a very good record. You're going to find, records. Well, I think George Steinmetz is a good person to look at if you're interested in seeing the effects of climate change and global food supply. He covers global food supply as well. And there are a lot of National Geographic photographers that cover climate and the effects, the things that are happening on the earth. There's another photographer by the name of Mandy Barker, who she did a social media project back in 2014, and she put out on social media for people to send her pictures of trash, but she asked specifically for soccer balls.
Wow.
And there were soccer balls that washed up on all different parts of the world. And Mandy created a map with all of the places that these soccer balls came from. They collected over over 700 images. And her work is very interesting because she specifically focuses on photographing. In that case, it was marine refuse. And so people write about it, and obviously when you see these pictures by these different photographers and these different points of views that they choose to cover it, it just lets you see the effect of what's happening on Earth and from a different viewpoint.
So the next question I have, I'm actually going to ask in two parts, because I think that there are a lot of people who are becoming interested in taking up new hobbies like photography in times like these. So the first part of the question is, how can photography help us connect with nature and other people during these uncertain times? Jess, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think it can help us connect with nature because that's kind of all we have right now. We can't go to their shopping malls, we can't go to our movies and our concerts and everything else. And right now is the perfect time to get out there and see what we've been overlooking for so long. It's helped me connect with other like-minded people with platforms such as Instagram and Facebook, where I can put my photos up and other people can see them, and we can have discussions about exactly what we're talking about, the earth and how to preserve it, and seeing the details that we often overlook.
And Alyssa, have you noticed during these uncertain times, specifically over the last 4, 5, 6 months, photography helping to bring people together even when we have to be apart?
Yeah, like I belong to a couple of different organizations, photography organizations, and we managed to meet over Zoom. And I actually find it much more intimate than meeting in person sometimes, because I belong to this archive group, and a lot of the members are older, and they used to meet at the International Center of Photography in Manhattan. And I rarely made the meetings in person, but now I can reach out to these people and learn more about their work and what they're doing. And there are a lot of people, a lot of photographers are focusing on their archives, and a lot of photographers are, shooting more nature. And but it's interesting because these meetings that I go to, there'll be like 70 people that I'll see. And connect with them and their work, and we talk about the photography. And it's not necessarily nature photography, but I know your question was about nature photography, but there are a lot of photographers who are digging into their archives during this time. And obviously there are a lot of photographers that are going out and shooting nature as well, or just things in their own backyard.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So this is sort of the second part of this question having to do with people engaging more with photography during this time is what advice do you have for people who are just starting out in photography in general, but also who are interested specifically in nature photography? Jess, you can go ahead first.
So I've personally found that nature photography, just like any photography genre, it's just oversaturated. It's so hard. But I think if it's your passion, it's really important that you pursue it. I know for me, I personally get asked all the time why I keep trying. I mean, there's millions of other people trying to do the same thing, but I do it for me. And I think that the ones that give up are not the ones that make it. So it's kind of my thing to hold on. For equipment, I would say just stick with like the fixed lenses and always have an ND filter and a tripod on hand. And editing programs are super important.
So for people that don't know the Eddie Adams Workshop, it's been going on for 33 years, and it's basically we take 100 young students every year, photography students, and today we just announced our class of 2020. It's on our website, and traditionally the workshop is held in the barn in Jeffersonville, and we're also going virtual. And this is also the question, that we all have with, these 100 young photographers. And, but I think that a lot of the young people, like, they find a niche for themselves. The ones that find a niche and the ones that find stories that are important to them or mean something to them, are the ones that usually, rise. And, out of 32 years of the workshop, there have been 3,200 people that have gone through the Eddie Adams Workshop. And, some of them aren't in the business anymore, but some of them are Pulitzer Prize winners or World Press winners. And so it is difficult during these times. And social media has changed everything. It is a saturated market. Everybody's inundated with images, but people are still looking. So I think, as Jess said, where there's a will, there's a way.
Great. I think that also bleeds really well into my next question. This is going great. We've been talking about how photography can be sort of oversaturated, and there's a lot of perspectives out there. But do you think there are any uncharted areas when it comes to photography, and again, in particular with nature photography?
This kind of makes me think of the question, like, if you had to be an animal, which animal would you be? It's changed a lot throughout my life, the answer to that question, but most recently I've kind of decided that it like an ocean-based mammal, a whale or a dolphin, because really the only thing that we have not, like the only other animal's ability that we have not been able to recreate is getting to the depths of the ocean. And so I would say the only uncharted territory with photos is also the bottom of the ocean. Possibly space as well, but we've made it there, so we have it covered, at least one photo.
Yeah, with drone photography and satellite photography, I think you have, above the water covered. But yeah, underwater is a territory. I always worry about space trash when I'm trying to go to sleep at night, just wondering how much trash is up there. So I try not to think about that too much. Yeah, I would agree, because the Arctic is, as everything has really opened up with all the technology that has been advanced, in like the past 10 or 20 years. Being able to reach places that you haven't been able to reach before.
Drones have made it a lot easier for us to go beyond the bounds. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's very interesting, the deep underwater. Space isn't necessarily our final frontier. The bottom of the ocean that really might be the final frontier for us, especially when it comes to getting a visual on what's down there. But talking about our oceans and the rest of our environment, kind of leads me to think about conservation. And what do you both think the role of photography is in conservation and preservation of our natural world?
I think that kind of touches back to what Alyssa was saying earlier about the photographer getting up the planes and seeing everything, and then, being able to relay that back to some people that, there's people that have never left their states, never mind this country, and photographs allow them to better understand the harm that we're inflicting on our planet. And it allows them to see things that they would have otherwise never seen and learn.
Right, and at some point, photographs become a record of history, and photographers become, a type of historian, having captured a moment in time. And so, when you look back over time, you can see the patterns. You can see, good things, the bad things, the destructions, the growth. I always wish that there was a photograph of Manhattan before Columbus came, or not Columbus, whoever came, the Dutch. Because that would have been an amazing photo, or the amazing forest in off the coast of Seattle would have been an amazing photograph. So I just wish that we had a record of that.
Niagara Falls before we took it over.
And once again, that just leads so perfectly into another question that I wanted to ask the both of you. Being at a museum, one of the things that I do is to interpret history and tell stories. So I wanted to ask you, just like so many of the bombastic events, including the environmental movement of the 60s and 70s, were recorded in photographs. How, in your perspective, do photographs really serve to frame and interpret history, both back then and modern history?
Photography is really a voice that can't be ignored. We've seen this throughout many historical movements, kind of like you just mentioned. And it's becoming more and more apparent with the technological advances that we have with cellular phones and social media. And the publics are finally getting a chance to speak their truth from where they are. So it's not all professional photographers anymore. A lot of people have their iPhones and everything else, and they're documenting and they're collecting it. But it's a voice that cannot be ignored, which is amazing.
Right. When you figured, like, in World War II, like, how many photographers were there really? And then you compare that to, Vietnam, which was probably one of the most photographed wars. And then, more recent wars, there's been a restriction on photography and just hasn't been as much access. But, yeah, but everybody is a photographer nowadays. So, Eddie, my late husband, took a very famous photograph of in 1968 of General Luan executing a Vietnam prisoner. Nick Ut, who also worked at the AP, took a picture of the young girl running from napalm. John Philo took the picture of the Kent State shooting. And, those are pictures of Eddie's eras. Those are pictures somewhat of my era. And there are so many new pictures being created now that aren't by, that lone photographer that, back then, John Philo might have been the only person at Kent State, with a camera in his hand. And today that would have been a whole totally different situation. So there's no escaping what happens now.
Some very, very powerful statements there. Very, very much. To wrap up our question section, I had one final question that's for the both of you. I know that you both have experience with our armed forces, so I wanted to ask how your military experience has informed your view of the world, again, specifically nature, but the world in general, and also photographic practice in the photographic field.
So when I was in for actually 15 years, and a vast majority of that was spent overseas. I was in Singapore for 2 years, Japan for 3. That was split up between Okinawa and mainland. And to be honest, while I was over there, I was more intrigued by the climate and the people. The nature stunned me at first. I think my time in Singapore, I was more enthused with the nature to begin with because of the leaves. I remember there was a leaf that was like twice the size of my head. And I grew up in South Dakota, so I'd never seen that before. And then, of course, the spiders and the lizards, and I could keep going. But honestly, what I got lost in most of the time there was the people. Their climates are so different, and their locales are just, they live a different way. They do.
Yeah, I was overseas a couple times as a kid because my dad was in the Air Force for 20 years, and we were in the Philippines. He was learning to fly helicopters before he went to Vietnam. But yeah, so when we lived in the Philippines, there wasn't enough room to live at Clark Air Force Base, so we had to live off base, and in a gated community. Behind me was a sugarcane field, and the geckos running all over the walls, and we had bars on the windows. There were guard towers. You had to enter a gate with security, but and you couldn't drink the tap water. So just every week we had to go to a water station and fill up a jug full of water for cooking and for drinking. And as a kid, you don't really think about those things, but when you come back to the States and you realize you can turn on the water faucet and drink a glass of water out of the faucet, it's you realize that a lot of countries just don't have the same resources we have, and that water is a commodity in a lot of places in the world. And then and as Jeff said, I went from Texas to Wyoming, where it's arid and your grass was never green unless you watered it, and then we moved to Virginia, where everything is like lush and humid and overpoweringly green. Again, you realize the effect of the arid, the climate, the source of water. And we were in Japan briefly, and Japan is I think they're very careful about their trash because they're an island, and they're very strict about recycling, and they don't use as much paper products as we do because they're trying to control their trash. And so they eat more with on glass or whatever, or in the Philippines you get a rice ball or something, it's served to you in a banana leaf. But it's just everybody uses the resources that they have, basically. And so I feel like having moved around that much, you do have a little bit of a window on different parts of the world that also give you a picture of other places. But we all also look at all the photography, so that's also another window on the world.
It sounds like, the more you travel and the more people you experience, the more environments you experience, it really affects your view of the whole world.
Right.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, thank you, Jess, for your service, and Alyssa for your family's service. And that's the end of the questions that I had for both of you. And I think we have a couple of questions now from our audience that I'll read out. So Suzanne asks, Jess, how has your travel around the world changed your perspective on environmental issues?
When I was in India and when I was in Vietnam and Thailand, I would see piles of trash. And I thought that they were the wasteful ones. And I didn't realize that we actually ship our trash over there. And so it's very sad that we have become so spoiled in this nation that we are inconveniencing others. It's just brought my attention more. It's just brought that more to the forefront of my attention, and I'm more aware of my waste.
What I want to know is, what did the field at Woodstock look like, on August 16th, 1969?
Well, I can answer that one quickly. Bad. But there were a lot of people who stuck around to help clean up, so that's a very inspiring part of the trash story. We've got another question. Any tips or tricks for shooting in the elements, like rain or extreme cold?
In the cold, bundle up. In the rain, I always have an extra rag, or I wear 2 t-shirts, and the one underneath is my lens cleaner.
Jess, when you go out to shoot, do you go out looking for something in particular?
No. especially now with my macro, because most of them I shoot on public lands so that I'm not going out of the way to find the beauty. I wanted to be the beauty that everybody else could see if they were looking. So I just kind of go find a trail, start walking, and then when I see it, I see it.
Do you go like at certain times of the day? Like I know sometimes when I wake up and I'll see spider webs with dew, and I I think you only see them during the morning. So I just didn't know if you have favorite times of day that you like to go out, or like are there certain times of days where you can find a certain something?
I'm a huge fan of golden hour, which is in the morning and at night. But I just came back from 8 months in Portland, and honestly, I would shoot at all times of the day there, because when you're getting that close to something, you can really manipulate the midday sunlight. And so, if you want it to be harsh, you can, or you can move into the shadows and dance around with that a little bit.
And in Singapore, were you able to shoot in the what's that park they have there that's so amazing? It's a nature reserve or something.
The botanical gardens.
Yeah, there you go.
I everything in Singapore was so much harder to get to than it would
Right.
seem. Nobody had cars, and everything was by public transport. And I think I made it to the botanical gardens once, but I didn't take a camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was younger. I wasn't as prepared as I am today.
Right.
All right, so we've got another question. Jess, do you have a photo that you're most proud of?
Ooh, that's tough. I would have to choose a photo that I did in college, and it was actually a happy accident. It was when we were still shooting on film, and I had accidentally shattered a glass that I was trying to shoot. And I just put all the broken glass on my studio layout, and I started shooting, and I prayed for the best, and I got one of my best photos from there, and it essentially looks like a glass just spilled all over the page, and it's beautiful. I can post it in my stories later online so everybody can see it.
Sounds great. I definitely want to take a look.
Oh, I love it that you shot film. Okay.
Clear back. And digital allows us to be, I think it allows us to be more progressive with our work. I think with film, I was a lot more conservative, but with digital, I can play a lot more, and I get the results firsthand, so I can see if I'm really screwing it up or not and fix it in that time, which is great.
Oh, we have another audience question for both of you. Do you have a favorite country that you've been to?
Go ahead, Alyssa.
Okay. Oh my gosh, they're all so great. I went to India last year, and that was fascinating. Like you just have to hold a camera in your hand, and there'll be a picture. You don't even have to look for it because the pictures are everywhere, and just the way they live their lives. I remember one time we stopped for chai tea, and they don't give you a paper cup. It's a cup that's made of earthenware. And it's really small, and it's just made of earthenware. You drink your chai, and and then you take the glass and you smash it on the ground because it's just made of mud, really. And then so there's no like paper waste. And so India, it's amazing, graphically, plant wise, people wise, everything wise. And then having lived in Japan as a child, that's one of my favorite places. Because they have such a respect for nature and the elderly and children. They have a boys' day, they have a girls' day, they fly a red carp-fish flag for the boys and blue for the girls, or is it the other way around? I can't remember. But they just have such a respect for nature and beauty, and just even how they package things, and they're such a considered culture. And yeah, I think those two places.
I think I'm going to piggyback off that and agree that Japan was one of my favorite countries. Right before I got out of the military, I got 2 weeks in Yakushima, which is a small island between mainland and Okinawa. And I took a van, and I lived in a van for 2 weeks there. And I just traveled the island, and the people were so kind, and there was always a hot bath, or an onsen is what they called it.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah, yeah. No, those were the greatest. Yeah, like being able to sit outside in the snow in an onsen, or like and they did family bathing, like in a big tub, and no, that was, I forgot about that.
they're just, as a culture, they're so much more comfortable with themselves that they can, yeah, they do that. And then it's all like you say, it's earth-based. A lot of the meals I eat were just 2 or 3 ingredients, and they were all fresh from the sea, and so kind. The people were just genuine. It's refreshing.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's it for our audience questions. I just want to thank you both so much for being here and sharing your time with us. Do you have any final comments you'd like to make before I wrap it up?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, and thank you for making it work, virtually. I think it's a great way to keep in touch, and I can't wait to see Steely Dan at Bethel Woods, since they didn't play, what was it, the 4th of July, and to be back on the grounds there, which is so beautiful.
Julie, Alyssa, thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity.
All right, so everyone at home, thank you again for joining us. As I mentioned earlier, this is the first of a monthly series. We hope you can join us for our next Bethel Woods at Home, which is going to be held on Friday, August 14th. Museum Senior Curator Dr. Neil Hitch will be joined by Woodstock alumni and Bethel Woods volunteer Jim Shelley for 60s-inspired cocktails and conversation about music, memory, and the greatest festival of all time. As we're sure you're aware, our pavilion season has been canceled this year, the revenue of which helps to offset the cost to operate the center. In order to continue to offer programming like this at little to no cost, we rely on the generosity of individuals like you. If you're interested in making a contribution to Bethel Woods of any size, please visit bethelwoodscenter.org/donate. You can view Earth in Focus, a celebration of our dynamic planet, on the Bethel Woods campus now through spring 2021. Please visit our website for visitor info. There's an image of the exhibit installed on our campus today. I want to thank you all again just for being here, for sharing in this very special program. Thank you, Alyssa and Jess, for joining us. To everyone at home, stay safe and have a wonderful night.